Ugly Duckling Oboes is dedicated to the development of young oboe players. They provide quality handmade oboe reeds, private lessons, and high-quality oboe sales, rentals, and consignments. The oboes that they rent are conservatory mechanism oboes that include the left-hand F key and low B flat key. All are maintained by oboe-specific technicians. In-person lessons are available, as well as virtual lessons for students who live outside the geographic area or have transportation and scheduling challenges. They also offer online college audition coaching for high school juniors and seniors who plan to audition to be music majors. Visit uglyducklingoboes.com for more details on how you can set up yourself for success and sign up for their newsletter. That's uglyducklingoboes.com.
Hey, oboists! Have you ever found it difficult to sort out when and how to find a new oboe or English horn? Oboe Chicago streamlines the process, providing personal and professional consultation and a large selection of lovely instruments. The process feels comfortable and thorough. Selection includes F. Larrey of Paris, Howarth of London, Covey Oboes, and Fox products. For a current listing of Oboe Chicago's selection, please visit www.oboechicago.com. For a credit of $100 toward shipping, mention Double Reed Dish when you call or email Shauna.
Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz.
And I'm Jacqui Wilson, and you're listening to Double Reed Dish,
a podcast for oboists,
bassoonists,
and the people who love them.
So I'm fully vaccinated now. I know you have been for a while.
Yep.
And yesterday, for the first time in a year and a half, I ate in a restaurant.
Inside?
Inside, yes. Me and everyone in my party was fully vaccinated.
How did it feel?
It felt very interesting because it was like normal. Like, oh, this is, how I've done it my entire life, except for the last year and a half. But it was also like, I feel like I'm doing something naughty or like, like reminding myself like, okay, this is okay. And it was fun.
I had the experience last week of going out with some friends, like to an outdoor patio for a happy hour. And it felt so intense.
Yeah.
Like just making real eye contact with real people.
Yeah.
Felt really like, oh, wow. Did I used to do this all the time?
Do you know what was the funnest thing is we went to a Mexican restaurant and we've done our fair share of takeout, quarantine takeout.
Sure.
But when you do takeout, you don't get the chips that they bring to the table that you're just like, I'm nomming on these chips. Like, like warm chips. And they just keep coming no matter how much you eat. I was like, oh my gosh, chips. It was so joyful.
Yeah, joyful is a good way to put it. Yeah, it was like very intense and also like very joyful. And we were there for a really long time. It's like we were all just like craving human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And then there we were. And then it was like we couldn't break the spell.
Yes. Super exciting. And like, obviously, where necessary, we'll continue to observe restrictions and be responsible. But easing back into things that were previously not an option is like a wild feeling, but a great feeling. And we're also both on summer break right now.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any like fun things coming up or what are you looking forward to right now? I'm sorry, there's the garbage truck is like coming by.
Oh, I can't hear it.
They're gone.
Oh, wait, yes,
now.
I can. Yes, I can.
They're gone now. Pardon me. Just a little real life.
Ooh. Yeah, well, part of my post-academic year COVID summer plan
was to take a nap every single day, and I am achieving this goal. I have taken a 1 to 2 hour nap every single day,
That's
just about.
awesome.
I feel very good about it.
Now, do you wake up like sometimes I take a nap and I wake up groggy and it feels like I'm worse than before I took the nap.
Oh, 1,000%. I wake up in such a bad mood.
Okay, well, don't know how to respond, but I'm maybe glad for you. Best wishes to Becky or the dogs.
I wake up so grumpy. And it takes me like 30 minutes to an hour to acclimate to being awake. But I still do it every day.
Are you going to travel or anything?
We're going to go see our families for the first time in such a long time.
Yeah.
This summer. It's crazy. And I'm going to get a 10-year tattoo. Did I tell you that?
No.
Yeah, I have an appointment.
Oh, wait. Yes, you did. The blackberries?
Yeah.
Yes.
Get it right there. So I've got my appointment booked for that, feeling adventurous. And I'm going to record with this awesome quintet that I've been working with out of Oxford, Mississippi. So we have another rehearsal weekend lined up and then a recording week lined up. So that's really exciting. That's something that I've wanted to do for a while, is do some professional recordings. So that's really cool. And then brainstorming some new recital themes and, creative activity ideas for the next academic year, because it's like it counts again. So
you got over the first hurdle and now you're going toward the second hurdle.
Yeah. Well, not even just for tenure, just like COVID kind of stopped everything in my mind. It was just like, get through it, get through it, get through it, get the students through it. We got to all get through this. It was like a crisis management mode for an academic year. And then now it's like, oh, it's going to feel somewhat normal again. So I can put my energy into something more creative, and it's going to be cool. I'm excited.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing this summer?
Well, kind of similar. The big thing is the summer program that I teach at LSM is happening. We're going to have an in-person experience. And I know many of the listeners, and you included, had some face-to-face element this year. But WSU has been entirely virtual.
It's going to feel so crazy to teach in person.
Yeah, there are a couple colleagues who did in-person exceptions. My classes didn't require that. So I literally have not made music in person with anyone except Chris in the room in a year and a half. So I have not taught in person. I have not collaborated, rehearsed, done anything. And I'm, like many of us, very ready and very excited. So when we found out that we're going to be in person for that, so I'll move to Indiana for a month, and that's kind of obviously a big chunk of my summer.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, my big kind of brainstorming, as you put it, I'm planning to spend and have spent the last week in reflective time. I set aside about an hour a day. This pandemic and a lot of the events, that happened over the past year have kind of kicked ideas that were already ruminating in my brain into high gear. And there are some, how can I put it without being a bummer? I'm super excited about the bassoon as a tool, like with which to amplify ideas and voices and whatnot. But I have some questions about how I'm to go forward as a musician and as a quote unquote professor, that I really want to be answered before I continue on in my career.
That's so healthy.
Yeah, certain questions about, like, I guess, purpose and function, and service and approach, and some big ideas that I kind of never questioned. I just kind of marched forward, tried to climb, marched forward, tried to climb. And for the first time, I'm kind of zooming out and
what is all it for?
yes, asking some big why questions. And I
Mhm.
believe in what we do. I believe there are answers to those questions,
I
but
agree.
my priority is finding them before
Mhm.
doing anything else. I'm kind of in this place where I'm like, well, I can't decide what I'm to program until I answer this question. Well, I can't really strategize
Mhm.
effective recruitment until I answer these questions.
Mhm.
And until I really figure out one of my priorities is contemplating the idea of relevance.
Mhm.
And so I've been spending time. I have a bibliography I've created of reading
Mm.
list. That's the good part about easing back into everything is my summer is not jam packed to the brim to where I
Mhm.
can't take some time for myself to just kind of marinate in some stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect use of the summer. Dare I say more productive than napping every day?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both like, whoa, I need to recharge. I think that's essentially what
Yeah.
it is. We're both
Yeah.
being like, oh, there needs to be a resettling, recharging before
And
we
you're like,
jump in head
I'm going to
first.
answer some deep universal questions. And I'm like, I'm going to be unconscious for 3 months.
I mean, type 1 Enneagram, type 6 Enneagram. Chemical City Double Reeds is a full-service double reed shop specializing in the sale of instruments, cane, accessories, and sheet music. Double Reed Dish listeners can enjoy free shipping with code DRDISH, all caps, no spaces. Visit them in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or online at chemicalcityreeds.com.
Janet Ingle loves the oboe. She has built her business on providing high-quality handmade reeds, education, and a sympathetic ear to oboists across the country. When you order from Janet Ingle Reeds, you get prompt communication, reeds or cane handcrafted to your specifications, and cheerful, friendly customer service. All orders are mailed within 1 week, sometimes much faster. Single orders or monthly read subscriptions are welcome, and she'll work with you to find the combination of response, resistance, stability, and flexibility that is right for you. Janet doesn't just do reeds either. Look at janetingle.com for a selection of reed cases, swabs, and tools, or for reed making videos, classes, and boot camps. Podcast listeners can use the code DISH for 10% off their first order at janetingle.com.
We are delighted to welcome to Double Reed Dish Mary Lynch, Principal Oboist of the Seattle Symphony Orchestra. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
We love to get to know our guests by finding out how they started to play their instruments. So could you talk to us about how you began to play the oboe?
Sure. So I joined my school band program in fourth grade, but I started on the clarinet. Although I did actually start with the intention to switch to the oboe. I remember hearing our band teacher demonstrate all the instruments. And the two instruments that he did not have with him were the French horn and the oboe. And so he just said, I need kids who are up for a challenge to play these instruments because they're really hard and not too many people actually play them. So we need people to play them. And I thought that was a great idea. I wanted to play the hard one. So I don't know what that says about me, but
Classic.
So he suggested I start on clarinet, which I did. And I ended up really liking it, being pretty good at it pretty quickly. So I played clarinet for 4 years before finally switching to the oboe.
What happened once you finally switched to the oboe? What made you want to pursue it in college and then as your career?
I think, so my first thought about music as a career was when I was in 6th grade. I became obsessed with the music of John Williams. So I thought I wanted to be a composer, and my parents got me a little like 50 key electronic keyboard. So I would like plunk along, make up stuff. Then when I first thought of playing the oboe professionally, I think it was my second year of playing. I joined the DC Youth Orchestra program in Washington, DC, and that was my first time playing an orchestra, and I just absolutely adored it. I really dove into it. Like I would stay up late with my parts on my bed and my little CD player, listening to Scheherazade or Brahms 3 or whatever piece we were playing, and I would just like memorize the music. But yeah, I think it was probably 9th or 10th grade when I started getting more serious.
And what did that look like, getting more serious?
I think, well, so part of it was I started to get a little more competitive with it. Like I wanted to, get into the fancy youth orchestra. I wanted to go do summer camps. And I had a really wonderful private teacher who started me off on oboe. Her name's Teresa Trigiani. She's based in Maryland. And she studied with Cindy Dalmeda at Carnegie Mellon. So she was really familiar with like that world. And I think she would sort of guide me towards certain people. Like when I bought my first oboe with my parents, she sent us to John Seimer. So I was exposed to John Seimer. And then of course, he always has all these great stories to tell and anecdotes to share. And yeah, I just started getting sucked into that world and loving it.
I love it.
And you went to the Interlochen Arts Academy, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my, let's see, it was the summer after my sophomore year of high school. I was at a summer music program, and the oboe teacher there, Anna Maddox, suggested that I audition for Interlochen. And she sort of talked my parents into it, and I'm very grateful for that. So I went up with my parents that summer and met Mr. Stolper and had a lesson, loved it, loved the outdoorsy campus, and thankfully he took me and my parents let me go.
I would anticipate that would kind of set you on a trajectory of like, really serious focus on the oboe. And so I wonder if you could kind of walk us through your training and educational journey, commenting on like what those experiences were like for you.
Sure. So let's see. So I went to Interlochen for my last 2 years of high school. That's really when I became very serious about the oboe. That's when I knew I want to be principal oboe of an orchestra one day. And that's when I was also exposed to kids who were like way better than I was. I was, one of 9 or 10 oboe players in the class, and everybody could play. And there were some really incredible players in my Interlochen class. So I jumped right in. Like I loved having all that time to practice. Like I'd practice 5 hours a day and just be like thrilled about it. Which, I guess that says something. Like there has to be that kind of love and drive to pursue something as demanding as the oboe. Then from there, I went to the New England Conservatory for my undergrad and studied with John Ferrillo, which was really wonderful. My memories of NEC mostly center around playing Barrett in lessons and listening to John Ferrillo sing through the Barrett melodies. He very rarely would play in lessons. Like when he did, it was this huge treat, and I just like soaked it up. But he sang at every lesson, and so I feel like I learned how to play music just by listening to the way he would sing something and articulate things with his voice. Another really fond memory of NEC that has stuck with me is hearing the BSO play every week. Mm-hmm. I used to work as an usher at Symphony Hall in Boston, so I heard those shows multiple times every week for like a couple of years. So I learned so much that made a huge impression on me to hear that great orchestra. Mm-hmm. Then from there, I went to Juilliard for my master's degree and studied with Elaine Duvas and Nathan Hughes. That was an amazing learning environment there. I feel like those were like the 2 most productive years of my life. I worked so hard. We had 3-hour oboe classes every Monday night. Sometimes they'd go longer than that even. And the oboe faculty there just so genuinely loves to teach. And they seem, particularly Miss Duvas, seems like she's just tireless. Like mm-hmm. she could teach forever and still have inspiring things to sing. So yeah, then I was lucky, very, very lucky to win my first job while I was still in school.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so my first job was playing second oboe in the Cleveland Orchestra. And of course, I never expected to play in the Cleveland Orchestra, period, let alone win an audition for an actual position. So when that happened, I was like completely shocked and over the moon. I remember I didn't even bring a snack that day because I figured I wouldn't make it out of the prelims. So I was like starving. And I remember my friend Jen Kristen, who's such a lovely person, she gave me some of her nuts that she had because I was so hungry. But I remember after we played the final round, the personnel manager came backstage and announced the committee has chosen a winner, and that person is Mary Lynch. And I screamed at her. I screamed, "What?"
I love that.
And yeah, I remember that moment, like just being whisked away to meet people, and I was like totally shocked.
So was that your first audition that you've taken, or was that?
Oh God, no.
Oh, okay.
No.
That would be so epic.
that would be epic. Was not that lucky. I believe Cleveland was number 17.
Wow.
I started pretty young.
That's awesome.
I started taking auditions. I think it was my sophomore year. Yeah, it was my sophomore year of college. So it was before I was really ready for a job, but Mr. Ferrullo urged me to start at that age, so I did.
Sometimes our guests talk about the advantages of the fearlessness of youth in taking auditions, and I wonder if that's something that you have experienced also.
No. I wish I had. I was a nervous audition taker.
Yeah.
I mean, I still am. Like, I get nervous when I have to play in front of people. I get really nervous when I have to record. That's like a major mental battle for me. But yeah, the first few auditions I took, I felt horrible. Like I was just a total nervous mess.
Were you like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this?
Yeah, well, like I remember, like physically shaking and just feeling like I could barely get through a passage because I didn't take a deep enough breath or, it's those audition nerves for me. They were like really unique to auditions.
Interesting.
I would get so much more nervous for that. But since then, of course, I've figured out ways around that and it's gotten a lot better. I think particularly with experience, just being able to walk in and really know the excerpts. By now I've played most of them, so it's pretty different taking an audition now versus like 10 years ago.
Had your audition mentality mindset evolved by the time you had taken that Cleveland audition?
I think so when I first started taking auditions, I took them knowing I wasn't really ready. It was more of like just the experience, just for practice. And thankfully, most of those auditions that I took early on were pretty close to Boston, so it wasn't like I was flying across the country and all over the place. Yeah, but by the time Cleveland came around, I was ready and I knew it. Like, I remember being at Juilliard and having like some audition coachings with Nathan Hughes, and he just has a great mind for that stuff. The way that he thinks about auditions, how to prepare for them, like how to just sort of deal with them mentally, was really helpful for me. Like, he really tried to hammer it into our heads that the person who wins the audition is the person who plays the best on that day. Like, don't give yourself the excuse of, I don't know, of like, I could play really well and still not get it because it's a total crapshoot. Like, he tried to convince us that it wasn't a total crapshoot, and if you really do well, like you have a shot. And I think approaching it that way, like feeling as though I could take responsibility and feel like authority about what I was presenting, was really important for me.
Could we hear about your experience auditioning for and winning your current position in the Seattle Symphony West Coast, Best Coast?
Oh my God.
But I'm especially interested in, not an oboist, maybe this is a dumb question, tell me if it is, but you were playing second oboe, and if preparing for a principal oboe audition, you were having to kind of wear two hats, or if, you know, that balance and how you approach that. I'd love to hear about, your preparation and that day.
Yeah, that's a really good question. People ask me that a lot, like the difference between playing first and second and what I had to change or do differently. In terms of preparing for that audition while I had the job in Cleveland, I'd say it didn't strike me as like having to wear two hats or anything like that. I think playing first oboe and second oboe isn't really that different in terms of you're playing music and it's your job to do what the music asks of you, right? Like, it's your job to interpret and deliver what's appropriate for your part in relation to other parts. So that basic approach is totally the same either way. It's just being a musician, right? So yeah, I think the preparation process, it was very different from preparing for an audition while I was still in school. One of the things that was better was I had access to Severance Hall, so I could just go play mock auditions on the Severance Hall stage, which I did a couple times. I also was really grateful. I remember right before I went to Seattle, I played the list through for Rob Walters, he's an incredible musician and so articulate and insightful, like with the way that he speaks. And he had some really wonderful coachings for me. So that was really helpful and so lovely that section was supportive of me, pursuing something that I was passionate about. My audition story though that day was kind of epic because the Cleveland Orchestra was on tour in Miami. And the only way I could sandwich in that audition was I had to get up at like 3:00 in the morning, take a 4:30 a.m. flight or something like that out of Miami, flew then to Houston, transferred, and then flew to Seattle landed in Seattle. 2 hours later, I played my first round. So
What?
it was almost like I didn't have time to be stressed or nervous about it because I was just exhausted.
And your reads wouldn't have had time to change either.
No, I wonder. I don't really know anything about how that actually works, but I wonder if maybe that was it because they didn't feel that different. Maybe they just like didn't have time. So that's
You shocked them into staying put. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to just get there 2 hours before your audition and not even think about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and then the finals were the next day, and then I had a service in Cleveland the following morning. So I took a red eye back to Cleveland. So yeah, that was a busy weekend.
I would love to ask you about winning that Cleveland job right out of your master's degree. It was probably such a dream come true. And then so you win, you scream, you meet all the people, and then you have to do the job. And I would love to hear more about your journey into, professional musician adulthood, I guess, in a major orchestra.
That's such a great question. Because it really is. It is like a journey into musical adulthood. And it's one I'm still on, it's like that musical journey of becoming never really stops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when I was in Cleveland, I was still very much in the student mindset. I felt pretty unsure of myself and definitely felt out of my element. I think I had imposter syndrome, but that's something that I've struggled with over the years and more recently have made my peace with. But I think it was more in Seattle. That's where I feel like in Cleveland, I was like still a teenager, so to speak. And after my first few years in Seattle, I really started to feel like there was teeth to what I was doing.
Ooh, and I love that.
That feeling of self-assuredness.
Is that something that came with time, or was that something that you had to actively develop?
It probably would have come faster if I had tried to actively develop it. It was a little of both. A lot of it came with experience, like also just being asked to play guest principal in these great orchestras. Like the first time I did something like that was in the Chicago Symphony, I believe in 2016. It was a little while ago. And I felt like a kid in a candy shop. Like I was at the same time like wide-eyed at like just what that was and what it meant for me. But also kind of feeling, that imposter syndrome, like, am I gonna do this okay? Or am I gonna live up to whatever expectation? And after doing that in a number of different orchestras over the years and having it be a really positive experience, that I think helped me feel a little bit more like I could feel confident in what I was doing and authoritative with what I was doing.
So you're in Seattle, you win this awesome job in this awesome orchestra, and you're also teaching at the University of Washington. So I'd love to hear more about you as a teacher. What do you value? What is really important to you in your pedagogy that your students take away from their time with you?
I love teaching. I was so thrilled when UW asked me to come on faculty after my first year in Seattle, because I knew that was something I really wanted to be a part of my musical life, to be teaching at a college or university. My big things that I stress with all of my students is fundamentals, scales, long tones, the physicality of playing and trying to find a way that's like most efficient for each student, because everybody's a little bit different, and the way one person holds the reed isn't going to look exactly the same as the way another person is going to hold the reed. So exploring that and trying to find like the right recipe for sound production is something that I'm really big on, and it's tailored to each individual student. The other thing that I do with pretty much every student, unless they come to me and just say I want to do excerpts and just coach me on excerpts, is Barrett. So all of my students at UW who are undergrads go through the Barrett book, and I really tried to impart what was given to me by my teacher. And so I talk a lot about phrasing and line and tone development and working with long tones in relation to the Barrett etudes. I also talk a lot about atmosphere and trying to create a scene on stage. So my students are very used to me asking the question, like, what's happening here? Like, tell me what's in your mind, what's happening on stage, questions like that.
Speaking of students, we have many student listeners, and one thing they're always interested in when we have guests from who are orchestral players is that experience or knowledge and perspective gained on the other side of the screen, and what you've learned about auditions from assessing auditions, and maybe like what advice you have as someone who has been on committees and that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really is interesting when you finally get to the other side. I've lost count of how many auditions I've listened to at this point, and a wide variety of instruments as well. Mm-hmm. The things that come to mind when I'm thinking of somebody who, when they play, I think like, yes, like they just nail it. A followable sense of pulse is really important. Not a metronomic sense of pulse, but something that is followable. A beautiful sound, of course, and playing in tune with yourself is really important. Perfection is not important to me. And in my experience on both sides of the screen, I think perfection is in the sense of like note perfection, and also like perfection of expression. I think it's an impossible goal. And I find that, if I'm listening to somebody with that expectation, it's totally unfair. And if I'm playing with that expectation of myself, I usually end up playing worse, because then I get more nervous and I'm not at ease and like forgiving of myself if something does go wrong. I've won 2 auditions and gotten very, very close in several others. All of those auditions, I made embarrassing mistakes. Like, I'm talking about like in the final round for the Seattle audition, it started with the cadenza from the Strauss concerto, the one that precedes the third movement. Mm-hmm. And the and then so the up to the high F and then down to the A, and you sort of end triumphantly on the A, and it's very dramatic when you go up to the high F. So it was going really well, and I went for that high F, and it just cracked. Like it came out, that horrible sound that happens when you're high note. Yeah. But I was going for it. I just sustained that awful noise and kept going.
I love that commitment. I love it.
I guess it was fine. And actually, I remember Ludovic Morlot, who was the music director who hired me, when he met me after the audition, he told me he appreciated that it wasn't like this perfect audition, because he said it meant that you're willing to take risks. And so I think, yeah, try to get that out of your head. Like, perfection is not the goal. Doing yourself justice is the goal in an audition.
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, I have been having a lot of conversations with my own students lately about how perfectionism is poison, and it can actually derail you. It can derail your career if you don't treat it. It feels like an illness.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I really have to monitor with myself. Like, when I start to feel that kind of crippling self-doubt or like performance anxiety, it's usually because I have perfection as my expectation. I think that's why recording is like particularly difficult for me from the mental game perspective, because when you listen to a recording, it's basically perfect. But that's because people can, they edit recordings, right? It's not really representative of how somebody plays live. And I think sometimes I forget that. So it's good to remind yourself, like, perfection's kind of an enemy sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines, and talking about mentally preparing to do something, how does one go about preparing to play a double concerto with Itzhak Perlman? And can you talk to us about that experience, again, both in the preparation and in the execution?
Sure. I mean, that was like one of the coolest things I've ever done. That was so exciting for me. And I definitely felt like starstruck getting to do that. Yeah, when I was preparing, I can get kind of unreasonably picky about Bach. Bach holds a really special place in my heart, and I have such a specific sound in mind and approach in mind when I play it. And so I was nervous that like my pickiness would get in the way of me being able to kind of go with the flow. Because when you're playing with Itzhak Perlman, like, you're going to match Itzhak Perlman.
Yeah.
So in
Excuse
preparation,
me, sir, can you change your phrasing to match me, please?
Yeah, the phrasing you've been doing for the past 50 years, so eloquent. Yeah. So I listened to a lot of his recordings and just like tried to get his sound and approach in my head. What was really interesting for me was to get to play Bach with like this sort of old school Bach style player. Like, now I think when we play Baroque music, it's much more historically informed, and modern instrumentalists tend to try to imitate the sounds of a Baroque instrument. But I think Bach, in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, was played sort of more like Brahms. Like, it was a very different approach. So I tried to embrace that, and I had a wonderful time playing with him. He was like such a pleasure to work with, was constantly cracking jokes and just made me feel so comfortable. He's a wonderful human.
Oh, I love that.
I remember, I'll share one last anecdote.
Oh, yeah.
I remember playing the second movement with him in particular. Like, it was this really profound moment. Like, those moments where you're on stage and you just feel so present, and almost like somebody had a dial in your head and they were able to turn up your ability to listen by 50%. Like, that's how present you are. That is what I felt playing that second movement with him, because I think we were just both so attuned to each other's sound and phrasing, and I'll never forget that performance.
That's amazing. Talk to us more about your recording. You have alluded to that being something of like a brain block. And I would love to hear more about how you've, dealt with the recording process, and you have, recorded concertos, and I would just love to hear more about that.
Sure. Yeah, so my list of recordings seems to be growing. I'm slated to do another one of Christopher Nichols' music, but more of his like chamber music for oboe and sonatas and stuff coming up. And I recorded a couple of his concertos a few years ago, and then the Dabavi concerto a few years ago. So yeah, each time I make a recording, I feel like I get a little bit more comfortable and a little bit better at it. The first recording I did, major recording would be the Dutia. My French is terrible. Don't make me say French on the. Anyway, don't make me say that again.
Sorry, all native French speakers.
Yeah, we do have them, but
yeah, sorry.
Sorry. But you know what piece I'm talking about. So that was the first time I recorded something where it felt like a really big deal to me, and I was so nervous.
That's a hard one too.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, like it's really challenging technically. Also, how the parts play off of each other is really tricky. Like it takes a while. There isn't like this reliable sense of pulse. It's a tricky piece to put together. And we didn't have any rehearsals. We only had the 2 recording sessions scheduled. So I went into that like with all the parts memorized and like ultra prepared, because I did not want to be the reason that we had to do something again. Mm-hmm. And when you're recording with colleagues, that's really how it feels. You don't want to be that person who's mm-hmm. like, oops, can we do that again? I think one thing that I've learned about recording is I can let myself relax and just play as I would play if the microphone wasn't there. When you have a microphone and you're an oboist and it's like right in front of your face, mm-hmm. I think the tendency is to, at least for me, is to play a lot less and to be a little bit like to downplay things.
To play more conservatively.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the idea of like playing a fortissimo, tutti tone into a microphone that's right in front of me is like, oh no, that might not go well.
I feel so exposed.
Yeah. But I've learned like, oh no, like I can just play as I would play. And if anything, I am slowly getting better at feeling like I can take more risks when I record, because you can do it again, depending on the setting. I'd say when you're recording chamber music, it's a little bit different, but if it's just oboe alone, or oboe and piano, there's a little bit more room to take risks and to also try things. Like I did this several times in the Dabavi and also the nickel concertos, where I would record a passage 2 different ways and decide later which one I liked.
Oh, I like that.
Like if I couldn't decide exactly how I wanted to play something musically, where I wanted a phrase to go, if I wanted a certain dynamic somewhere, I would just record my options and then pick later.
This is a question I've been told is unfair, but I like asking it. It's a hypothetical in which the Seattle Symphony music director comes to you and says, Mary, I'm drawing a blank. You get to program one of the concerts on the upcoming season. Anything you want. What would be the program of that evening in your dream concert?
Well, if that really happened right now, I would say Florence Price Symphony No. 1.
Ooh.
It has a gorgeous oboe part, and I really think it's important to be programming works by Black composers. I would also include, I've enjoyed getting to know the music of Ruth Gibbs. She's also written some symphonies that I like, and the number, I can't remember if it's, Symphony 2 or 4 or whatever, but there's a particular symphony that I would be, I would want to look up and program on that concert as well.
So you already shared with us one beautiful memory of a past performance. And we love to ask, what's a favorite memory of a past performance? And if there is maybe a funny memory that you would be willing to share with us, maybe something that happened that was funny or embarrassing, or anything to make us feel like less perfectionistic in our goals.
Oh, I have several of those stories. One really incredible musical experience was getting to play Bruckner's Fourth Symphony in the St. Florian Abbey in Austria, which was where Bruckner worked, and that's where his music was performed when it was first written. That was made into a recording, and that was actually like one of the very first things I played when I was in Cleveland. So I was very, very green and nervous, but excited, and I knew that second oboe part backwards and forwards. I remember there were even a couple of second oboe solos, so like I really enjoyed that. And the acoustic of that space and getting to hear his music in that space was something I'll never forget. It was like suddenly Bruckner made sense. All of those really long held notes and long lines and the texture of Bruckner made so much more sense in that acoustic, which was very boomy, but also really lively. Like it wasn't like a bathtub kind of dank boomy. It was like this beautiful, effervescent, heavenly kind of boomy. Yeah, and then funny stories. Something I've done on occasion at orchestra is it's happened like twice, but it was very funny both times it happened. I had my finger on, one time I had my finger on the second octave key when it was not a second octave key note. And it was in tombo. This was just a rehearsal. But we were rehearsing tombo several years ago. We got to the middle part of the rigodon movement. You start on the G, and I had the octave key down, and so it came out like this really awkward sounding high G, because the air you use to play an octave key note is totally different from the air that you use to play a lower octave note. So everybody, like I just kind of stopped because I was stunned at the sound that came out of the oboe, and everybody had a chuckle.
Did you kind of take the oboe out of your face and like look at the reed, like, maybe it's the reed?
I just had this moment where I was just like, oh, sorry. Everybody kind of laughed and we started again.
Excuse me, I just had an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
I'm here now.
It's like a brain fart experience.
That's amazing.
That happens on occasion.
What advice do you have for a young musician who aspires to have a career like yours?
I saw that question on your question sheet and I was like, oh man, how am I going to answer that?
It's another unfair question.
I think it's good to be really introspective about what music means to you and what kind of drive you feel to pursue it. I think, not to be Debbie Downer, but a lot of young players don't realize how much work it takes to get to establish yourself with a career in music. I practiced so much, so many hours by myself in a practice room. I think if you really want to do this, you have to like live and breathe music. Like it has to be running through your head throughout the day. Like it really has to be a part of, like a huge part of your life, not just something that you turn on sometimes, or you turn on for a few hours a day and then you go and kind of do whatever and you don't think about it. So I think just being introspective about that, asking yourself some tough questions, like, what am I willing to do to pursue music? What Like, am I willing to dedicate, like 3 to 4 hours of practicing plus another 2 to 3 hours of reed making every day for years? Do I have that kind of stamina for it? Do I have that kind of appetite for it? I think those are really good questions to ask yourself honestly. And it can be kind of hard to do that. Like, it takes courage to ask yourself those questions. But it's really worth thinking about.
And sometimes the answer might be no, I'm not willing to do that.
Right. But the thing is, like, whatever the answer is, it's good knowledge for you. Like, it's a win, because then you know what's important to you. So that's probably good life advice in general, like outside of music, just being introspective and asking yourself questions about what is important to you for your life, what makes you feel most alive.
Mary, this was such a wonderful conversation. We're so grateful that you were willing to spend an hour with us on Double Reed Dish.
Oh, it was a pleasure. You guys are great.
Thank you. Can we put that on our website?
Yeah.
You guys are great. Mary Lynch.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please support us by liking, following us, rating, reviewing on iTunes, sending us good vibes. Anything you can do, we're, very grateful. Very, very grateful. Who's the next guest, Galit?
Next on the podcast, we have a fabulous interview with Tristan Rennie, artist faculty in residence at the University of Northern Colorado and second/assistant principal bassoon with the Colorado Symphony. Jacqui, let's end this nerd parade. I need to recover from my nap.
Go make reeds.